I swear, you know, what's going on in Victoria is so crazy, I struggle now to understand it. It's beyond reason, but maybe I'm missing something. So I talked earlier to a man who's been a Premier of Victoria, a very fine one actually, and asked him to try to explain it to me if he could. That man is Jeff Kennett. Jeff Kennett, thank you so much for joining me. Victoria, the shops in Melbourne have been shut for 13 weeks already. The Premier of Victoria says they must shut for another 2 weeks still. Is that a reasonable response to this virus?
No, it's not, sadly, and it does clearly indicate and sends a message from the Premier and his government, particularly to those in small business, that they have no appreciation at all as to, firstly, the economic damage they have done and are doing, but also the psychological damage they are doing. And to keep retailers closed going into Christmas, many of whom will not last beyond Christmas. In other words, they'll use this period to clear their stock, but many will not survive beyond that. To be able to keep our restaurants and our pubs closed, when across the border in New South Wales, they've been dealing with clusters much larger than the sort of numbers that we're recording today and yesterday. And yet this Premier is actually deliberately setting out to ensure that so many of our retailers, businessmen and women and employees are denied the opportunity to trade. So that, Andrew, is my first point. A total disregard for the economic and mental well-being of so many in this community.
What do you think is driving this? Is it a sort of messianic desire to get rid of this virus, that he will save us from it? Is it a lack of understanding of business? Is it a fear that if there's a third wave, he's finished? I don't get it. I mean, there's something bizarre going on that Victoria, with only 9 new infections over 4 days, still has the world's worst restrictions and the longest still going on.
Yes, well, we started off by trying to control the virus, contain it, and then they've gone for elimination, and now they're back to part control, part containment and part elimination. And again, you only have to look at what's happening in New South Wales, and the contrast is very, very real. I think the other thing that's missing right now, as you know, Melbourne, Victoria, has been denied football fundamentally all year. We've been denied the finals. The MCG will be silent, empty on Saturday, all as a result of this government's failure. And yet they could have used this weekend as the start of the rebuilding of hope and optimism. They could have allowed our restaurants to open, with safeguards, of course, and our pubs, to people to celebrate. Now, football's not the only thing in the lives of Victorians, and health is very, very important. But you could manage the two. And again, the Premier has decided, no, you can't watch the game with your mates and your friends, you can't celebrate or commiserate, but the day after, we're going to relax the rules. This is an act of great personal cruelty. I think he's just punishing us. I think he's just whipping this society to death by 1,000 cuts. And as we know, he is not above blame and must accept responsibility for what he and his government has done. He's the head of government, and yet he still can treat all of us with contempt.
There's other things too, like him being very upset about New Zealanders coming over, where New Zealand's got almost no virus at all. There's no risk, and yet he's gone for 3 days about what an outrage it is they're coming. And in the country, for example, country Victoria, he'll allow pubs to have some people inside, but churches no. I don't get the point of some of these bans. The 25 kilometre from home rule, it's been relaxed from 5 kilometres, but what does it matter? As long as you maintain social distancing, whether you go 25 kilometres or 30 kilometres from home.
Well, I think, Andrew, the reality is Victoria has a population of about 6 million. 1/5 of them, or 1/6 of them, live in rural Victoria. The other live in the city. We've only had 4 cases today, 1 or 2 yesterday. To have borders within borders, whether it be 5 kilometres, 25 kilometres, or this ring of steel so you can't go into regional Victoria, is stupid. Because what you're ultimately doing is destroying so many of those businesses that people in the metropolitan area go to visit, the tourist attractions, etc., etc. So, you know, it is incomprehensible what he's doing. I don't know what's driving him, but it's not something I've ever seen before, and it's not something many people can explain. His supporters say it's all about health, but I can tell you what, health relates to the health of the economy. Health relates to the well-being, the psychological well-being of those you lead. And both in failing to understand the economic damage he has done and doing, and the damage he's causing psychologically, and finally not to use this weekend as an opportunity to start the rebuilding, this is an individual who only eats and lives his own mindset. He doesn't think outside what he is doing, and we are being punished. And for this coming weekend, I think it's just plain cruel.
Finally, Jeff Kennett, you've been Premier of this state for 2 terms. Do you understand why, with everything that's happened, the blunders that caused this virus, the unbelievable lockdowns since by the same government, the irrationality of some of the things that is done, the incompetence of his contact tracers, etc., etc. Do you understand why the Premier still seems so popular? Why are Victorians taking this?
Don't worry about that, my friend. In an emergency, the community always look to their leaders for answers. That is a very different situation from an election. This government will not be returned, even though the election is 26 months away. By then, we're going to be dealing with a new economy, an economy which is smaller than it is now, with less population, where universities are not attracting overseas students, where in fact the unemployment rate will be very high, and every strip shopping centre will be living evidence of what the Labor government has done, because they'll be empty. There'll be no one in them. So this government won't survive, and I'll make you a very small wager this Premier will not be there beyond June next year.
Jeff Kennett, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Andrew, I'm only here to serve.
Whenever I have Jeff Kennett on the show, I get emails from Victorians, please, can he be Premier again? Well, don't worry, I asked him exactly that today. Let's see if that seed germinates.